There's a big name within the Denver Broncos organization that almost no one outside the building is talking about yet. But those who pay attention already know that this player could quietly become one of the most fascinating long-term projects on the entire roster. We're talking about a 6 feet 2 inches giant with unbelievable size, brute strength, and a profile that has intrigued coaches behind the scenes. And honestly, after hearing the full story about why the Broncos invested heavily in this undrafted offensive lineman, you might start to see the future of that offensive line in a very different way. But before we continue, don't forget to like if you truly believe the Broncos are building something special for the future. And I want all the optimistic Broncos fans in the comments to write, "Go Broncos! The future in Denver is bright." Now let's get directly into what is happening. One of the most important details surrounding this entire discussion is that Sean Payton himself openly talked about how the Broncos approached undrafted offensive linemen this year. According to him, the organization viewed several of these players as prospects who actually carried draftable grades, and that changes the way fans should look at these additions immediately. And among all those names, Tyler Miller instantly jumps off the page. The numbers alone sound almost unreal. Tyler Miller stands at 6'9" and weighs 335 pounds. That is not normal size even for NFL offensive linemen. He also arrives with significant experience after making 50 career starts in college football while playing at Iowa State. At 24 years old, he already brings maturity and a large amount of playing time into the Broncos system, and that matters when you are talking about developmental offensive linemen. What makes this story even more fascinating is that his final college season was considered his best. His pass protection grades were viewed very positively, and there is clearly a belief that his potential as a tackle is extremely high if the Broncos coaching staff can properly refine his game. The discussion around Tyler Miller right now is not about whether he already looks like a polished NFL starter. It is about the possibility of molding rare physical tools into something much bigger over time. And honestly, when you start looking deeper into his athletic profile, you understand why Denver became interested. His relative athletic score reportedly reached 9.23, which placed him in an elite category for his size profile. That combination of height, weight, explosiveness, and raw power is exactly the type of upside teams gamble on when searching for hidden gems after the draft. There was even a description from someone who claimed to know him from high school, calling him a corn-fed behemoth with enormous physical upside who still needs technical development. And honestly, that single phrase perfectly summarizes where Tyler Miller currently stands. This is not a finished product. This is a long-term project with gigantic upside. Another detail Broncos fans should not ignore is the financial commitment connected to him as an undrafted free agent. Reports mentioned that he received around $275,000, which is a very notable amount for a player entering the league without being drafted. That strongly suggests the Broncos truly wanted him and likely see him as much more than just a camp body. Now here's where things become even more interesting for the future of the offensive line. The current Broncos offensive line is viewed internally as one of the strongest and most stable units in football right now. Because of that, Tyler Miller is not entering a situation where he must immediately start. Instead, Denver can afford to slowly develop him, possibly beginning on the practice squad while refining his technique and helping him adapt physically to the NFL level. And that might actually be the perfect scenario for a player like him. At his size, if the Broncos coaching staff can sharpen his fundamentals, improve his consistency, and maximize his power, there is a real possibility that he eventually fights his way into a much bigger role in future seasons. The organization clearly believes there is something worth investing in here. But Tyler Miller is not the only offensive lineman quietly entering this competition. Another name generating attention is Gavin Ortega out of Weber State. Unlike Miller, Ortega's profile is built less around overwhelming size and more around technique, athleticism, and versatility. He measured at 6'5" and 304 pounds, and while that size raised some concerns for tackle duties, evaluators praised his hand usage, movement ability, and overall athletic testing. What makes Ortega intriguing is his flexibility. He has experience at both tackle and guard, and there are already discussions that he could eventually fit inside at guard or even center if needed. His athletic profile reportedly graded very well across speed, agility, and explosiveness categories, and he was also one of the highest graded offensive tackles in the Big Sky last season. So now the Broncos suddenly find themselves with two very different developmental offensive linemen entering camp. One is a massive physical specimen with enormous upside but technical refinement still needed. The other is a more polished and athletic blocker whose versatility could make him valuable across multiple positions. And this is where the competition inside the offensive line room could become one of the most fascinating under-the-radar stories heading into the season. Because even if these players do not immediately crack the final 53-man roster, the Broncos clearly appear committed to building long-term depth and developmental options for the future. What makes this entire situation even more important for Broncos fans to understand is how valuable these developmental offensive linemen can become over time if the organization gets the evaluation right from the beginning. The current offensive line may already look extremely stable right now, but the Broncos are clearly thinking ahead and preparing for future changes inside that room. There was already discussion surrounding the possibility that certain veterans may not remain part of the long-term picture forever, which means the Broncos are trying to build layers of depth before they actually need them. And honestly, that is why players like Tyler Miller become so fascinating. They are not being asked to save the offensive line immediately. They are being given time to grow, time to learn, and time to physically adapt to NFL competition. And when you think about Tyler Miller specifically, the ceiling becomes very hard to ignore. A player standing 6'9" with that kind of power and explosiveness simply does not come around very often. The Broncos are clearly betting on the idea that technique can be coached while rare physical tools cannot. That is the entire gamble here. If they can successfully improve his hand placement, footwork, leverage, and consistency, they may eventually uncover a player who could surprise a lot of people over the next few seasons. But fans also have to remain realistic about where things stand today. Right now, the expectation still feels centered around practice squad development rather than immediate roster impact. And honestly, that probably benefits him more than anything else. It gives him a chance to develop without the pressure of needing to contribute right away against NFL pass rushers every single week. What is interesting is that the Broncos already appear to have a very crowded offensive line competition developing behind the starters. There are only so many roster spots available, and according to the discussion surrounding the current depth chart, several names already look close to guaranteed locks to make the team. That means players like Tyler Miller and Gavin Ortega may have to battle aggressively just to earn those final developmental opportunities. And honestly, that competition could become one of the hidden storylines of training camp. Because sometimes these roster battles produce unexpected winners. One strong preseason performance, one impressive week of practices, or one breakthrough moment during camp can suddenly change everything for a young lineman trying to earn trust from the coaching staff. And when coaches see physical traits that cannot be taught, they usually become very patient with those players. That patience is exactly why Tyler Miller remains such an intriguing name right now. The conversation is no longer simply about whether he was drafted or undrafted. The focus has shifted toward what he could become 2 or 3 years from now if his development goes according to plan. And based on everything being said around him, the Broncos absolutely believe there is something they're worth investing in. At the same time, Gavin Ortega gives Denver another very different type of developmental piece. While Tyler Miller dominates discussions because of his unbelievable frame, Ortega earns attention because of his versatility and polished technical approach. Evaluators pointed toward his hand usage, athletic movement, and ability to potentially contribute at multiple positions along the offensive line. And that flexibility matters a lot when teams are building backup depth. A player capable of handling tackle, guard, or center responsibilities can quickly become extremely valuable during a long NFL season. That is why Ortega may quietly have a very real opportunity to stick around if he proves he can consistently compete physically despite concerns about his size. The Broncos also have recent history showing that undrafted offensive linemen can successfully carve out roles inside this organization. That experience alone probably gives these young players confidence entering camp because they know the coaching staff is willing to invest time into developing overlooked